Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Right, well, welcome back. This is a special lecture that I've been asked to give you. It's about human resource management. It's your introduction to human resource management, but I was asked specially to talk about New Zealand. So it's got human resource management and the New Zealand perspective. And later on, we'll be doing other perspectives in human resource management, including China. But for the moment, we're going to talk about New Zealand. And fortunately for us, New Zealand is fairly typical of what has actually happened in relation to both the theory and the practice in human resource management. So we're going to be following that through. The lecture is about 45 minutes long. Then we'll have our break. And then afterwards, we're going to have a tutorial. All right, is there any questions? No? No? All right. Let's start with some pictures. Right, and that takes us to the start of the lecture. Those pictures aren't just random pictures. Those pictures relate to the things that we're going to be talking about in the lecture in different ways. So the lecture, special one on human resource management in New Zealand. And the topics that I'm going to talk about the concept of human resource management first of all, and then we'll talk about human resource management in New Zealand, and that will particularly relate to the notion of culture. So that will be the emphasis there. And then the last part is to do with emergency management, human resource management and emergency management. And I'll tell you about some research that I did in relation to that topic. So, human resource management, the concept. We've been talking earlier on about various ways that you can define or say what management is about. All right? And one way is that it's management of people for a purpose. If we're talking about human resource management, the management of people for a purpose. And it's actually quite a loaded statement, that, because when you say the management of people, you've already set up this notion that there's somebody there doing the managing, and there's somebody over here who's being managed. And it's kind of hierarchical, isn't it? The manager's up here at the top, and the employees, or as the Americans would say, the subordinates, they're down here. And you and I, we're the subordinates, aren't we? We're the bottom of the heap. We're being told what to do. And so the management of people for a purpose, and usually the subordinates, the people at the bottom of the heap, they're not the ones that decide what the purpose is. They're there basically because they need a job and they need money and they've got to find somewhere to live and they've got to pay for their food. So they're not necessarily that keen on the purpose that is the basis of the organisation that they're in. This raises the question, there is a difference between management and self-management. And I suspect that most of you prefer self-management. In this course, I'm doing things to try and help you be self-managers, to do things yourselves. So, for example, you'll notice I never check the attendance. Whether you come here or you don't come here doesn't worry me. Right? I don't check up on that. You can manage yourself. If you want to come to all the sessions, well and good. If you don't, that's fine by me. All right? But what I do worry about is how you do in your tests and what the standard is in your assignment. So I look at those things, but how you get there, how you study, that's over to you. That's your self-management. Now, most people prefer a fair bit of self-management. They don't actually want to be managed. And because you're coming to university, the plan is that you are going to go on, you're business students, and you're going to go on and you're going to be able to manage yourselves, to set your own goals, to set your own targets, and to pursue things. And that's what we're aiming at. So your courses try to make sure that you are self-managing to the extent that we can. We'll be talking more about that later on in your course. When you're in a business, the whole thing of management is often said these days that the art of managing is actually to win agreement of people, to gain the support of people for a particular enterprise. And that's okay, but nevertheless, on the one hand, it's a good way to go because it's friendly and it's positive and it's trying to get you all to work together in a good spirit. But nevertheless, it's a gaining agreement still is a term where I come as the manager with some set of ideas and I'm going to get your agreement, right? That's different from us sitting down as equals and coming up with some sort of arrangement or some sort of plan. Now, just in the last 10 or 20 years, a new term has entered human resource management. In the good old days, it was the management of people. All right? It was just people worked in businesses and they were managed and you would be concerned about their performance. But over the last 20 years, a new term has entered into management theory. And that term is the management of resources, as in human resource management. What does it mean to say something is a resource? What is a resource? What are the resources that we've got around here, for example? I'm talking to you. We've got the computer. We've got the projector. You've got your desks. You've got your pencils and pens. All right? All these things are resources that you're using in this room and that I can use. They're our resources. They're the things that we've got to get the job done. All right? And any business is going to have a set of resources like that. But it's now said that the human beings, are a resource. They're there to get things done, for you to use to get things done, in the same way as you will use your desks and your pencils and all the other things that are in the business. So we have human resource management. We're looking at the human beings as a resource, the same as the desks and the chairs and all the other stuff that you've got. Can you see how that's kind of bringing the notion of a human being down? Okay, so the management of resources, what is a resource? We just talked about that. Well, there's a question for you, isn't there? If we're going to be talking about human resource management, the question is, what do you think about people? Do you think people should be treated as a resource? Or do you think people are in some way special and need to be treated in some sort of special way, different from the tables and the chairs and the other things that you've got to use? Should you use people or shouldn't you? So, there are two, if you were to ask today, what are the two sort of theories or the two big sets of ideas about human resource management, about the management of people in businesses and other organisations, there are two approaches that are used, all right? There are two approaches. Now, I've given them a name. One of them, which is the most common one, I've called the modern way, and the word that we would use to describe it is neoliberal. Neoliberal, and I'll talk about what that means in a moment. And then there's the alternative to the neoliberal approach, and I've just called it the alternative, and I've called it post-neoliberal. So let's just go through those words and say what they mean. Start with the word liberal. Liberal's a really old word. It goes way back. It's got Greek origins, I think, the word liberal. But the whole idea of liberal, as in liberty, is the notion that people are able to make their own decisions and that they can pursue their own lives. They have a freedom to pursue their own lives and to develop things as they want to be developed. And the great example that's in contrast to liberal theories is slavery. All right? So if you're a slave, everything is set out for you and you can only do certain things. But if you take a view that the theory that should be pursued is liberalism, all right? That's like the opposite of slavery. Like you have a certain set of rights. And the most important right in the history of the West was the right to own property. Whether you could own a piece of land or whether you couldn't own a piece of land. And of course, slaves couldn't own land. Slaves couldn't own land. So the poor slave, they had to live somewhere. So immediately they've got to say, well, I'm a slave, I've got to live where I'm told to live. That's it. So this word liberal has a big, long and complicated history, and it has all sorts of meanings, all sorts of flavours of meaning. And it's a word that we're going to be picking up on when you do your glossaries, which we will get to in a couple of weeks' time, what the word liberal actually means. Because liberal is a word that's really at the heart of the West. If you're talking about the whole history of the West and how things are looked at in the West, that's a really good word to know. Now, the theory that is the most common theory of human resource management in most Western countries, including New Zealand, is called neoliberalism or neoliberal. Anybody know what the word neo means? New. Ah, very good. New. That's right. The new theory of liberalism. All right, the new theory of liberalism, which doesn't tell us a heck of a lot about what it actually is. But it's based on a theory of economics and a theory of society and a theory of management. Now, I just want to pursue this a tiny bit more. We're talking about the theory that is in common use in practice in New Zealand today. Let's ask, where did that come from? And to ask where did it come from, that theory, is the same as asking, what is the history of management theory? And saying, what is the history of management theory, that's exactly the same as saying, what is the history of human resource management theory? They're the same thing, all right? They're the same thing. Human resource management's really a very, very big part of all management theory. It's got to be there in some way, although there was a time when it wasn't. So if you just have a look over here, I've put a sketch out, just a very quick sketch of where management theory came from and where it's going, perhaps. The reason that I'm doing this is just to help you with this notion of the neoliberal theory that we've got today. And these are things that we're only going to mention now, but they're things that later on in your course we're going to be picking up more and more. And we're going to pick up them in two places. When we talk about management theory, you're going to be going through some of the main theorists in management theory, and then we're going to be talking about ethics, business ethics, and this will be important there too. All right? So if we go way back, just a few hundred years, I mean, management theory that we're talking about, modern management theory, started only relatively recently, really. There were ideas about sociology and economics, but there was no kind of constructed management theory a few hundred years ago. What occurred was that there was the modern scientific revolution, that modern science and modern technology began with Galileo, the Italian, Galileo, began with Isaac Newton, the Englishman, and a whole lot of other people, probably about 20 important people, that started off this whole business of modern science and thus modern technology. So modern science looked to be very important and very successful. Galileo, for example, when he invented his telescope, and his telescope was about as good as a poor pair of binoculars, it magnified about 9 times. When he invented his telescope and he went down to Rome from Florence, He didn't go down there and tell them, I have made an advance in optics. He didn't say that at all. He said, I can tell you how to get advanced warning when there are ships coming over the ocean to attack Rome. You look out to sea with my instrument, and you can see the ships before they get here. And it was very popular, and that was a very significant moment, because in that, Galileo had mixed science and technology and politics and warfare, all those things mixed in together in that notion. There was the optics, which he did with the lenses. There was the technology, the construction of the telescope. There was this question that the people in Rome really did want to know if they were going to be invaded. It helps to know if somebody's going to invade you. A little bit of warning is a good thing. So all of those things, and at that moment we had science, technology, politics, practical management, all mixed in together. Okay. Now, people looked at the success of modern science, Newton's science, and they said, look, science is making advances. What about management? Why can't we get our factories going better? Why can't we get more productivity? And the result of that was a series of theories which we could call scientific management theory. The notion that you can use the sorts of methods that they used in science and physics to study management and to work out how things could be done. And the main thing that was about modern physics that was important was that it was based on observation, that you look at how people are actually doing things, and you discover which is the best ways, and then you say, right, you're now going to do it these ways. There were heaps of management theories, and they sort of worked for a little time, and then it was discovered that they weren't working very well at all. There was lots of things wrong with them. And the reason that they weren't working well, really, was because all those theories didn't take account of human beings. They didn't take account of human beings. You see, you can work out how somebody might work well in their job. They might, for example, be working at a bench constructing something with tools, and you can work out how they should do it, and you can tell them what to do. But say that person comes to work and they've just had a bad situation at home. Say one of their children is really sick. They're going to be worried about the child, aren't they? And they're not going to be able to do their work well because they will have that worry about the child. Or they might have been a big argument about something at home, right? Or they might be in the middle of shifting house. All sorts of things that you could bring to the job. That's not a part of management theory, but nevertheless it affects the productivity that occurs. So the next big sort of step in management theory, sometimes called humanistic management theory, is to bring in theories about human beings and to say it's really important how we manage human beings. And it was in that, really, that you had the birth of human resource management as we have it today. So, human beings. Now, neoliberal theory, the common theory today, is really a mixture of ideas from scientific management theory and humanistic management theory. And that's where we get our neoliberal theory. Okay? Now, post-neoliberal theory, fact of the matter is that this common theory, a lot of people don't like it. A lot of people object to it, and a lot of people think that it's wrong. And one aspect of neoliberal theory that's become really seriously wrong in the last little while is the economic downturn that the whole world has suffered over the last 7 years. Right? Because it was this theory that got us into all the trouble that the banks and others are in. I mean, it was that theory that was the base of what was happening. So we've got protests all around the world against neoliberal theory. And this particular book, which I put on there for you, this is against neoliberal theory, The Deadly Ideas of Neoliberalism. How the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, right, big funding agency in the world, has undermined public health and the fight against AIDS. In other words, the bankers and the commercial structures, particularly the commercial structures of the West we're talking about here, they work in such a way as to make it difficult for us to fight against AIDS. That's what that book says. Now, neoliberal theory, you remember we had this when we were introducing management theory to you before. The introduction that you had to management theory a few weeks ago, that was neoliberal theory. That was the standard basic neoliberal theory. Had I gotten up and started somewhere else, people might have looked at me as if it was a bit strange, because that's the basic heart or core of what happens in the management of businesses, and you've already learnt about that. And now I'm just labelling it and saying that is neoliberal theory. And you remember we talked at great length about the importance of measurement in all of this. You set precise goals and you measure the results and you use the measured results to set your next goals. The measurement bit comes right from here, right? The scientific idea of observation and measuring. There are a few other ideas that go with the neoliberal theory. I'll give you that one and then we'll come back. This shows the neoliberal theory applied to companies or businesses. And basically you've got two lines here. We've got the mission or the big purpose, as it were, for the organisation. Then we've got the what and we've got the how. The what, the setting of organisational priorities, big priorities, then the departmental priorities, and then the jobs for the individual people. So if you look down there, it says the business, this is the big goals, the department, smaller goals going down, and then the person, what each individual person does. So if we take this university, for example, as a business, which it is, all right, this university has a whole big mission, and that is to produce educated, qualified, competent people for working in the province. That's really what this university is about, to produce the workforce for the province, but also a bit wider. So that's why you're here, to be the workforce for the province. You thought you were here to have fun, but that's not true. So that's the big goal of the university. The department, your school of management, that has certain objectives that come from the big goal. And then I am down here. I get the job of teaching you, right, a particular course which is supposed to contribute to the whole thing. So that's how the organisational priorities work. And then the other thing that goes in there is the how, which is about the values that we have. All right, the values. One of the values that we have in the university is that we're going to use modern teaching methods. Right? We're going to try and use the best teaching methods that we can, and we're working on that. And we've talked about skills and behaviours in your first lecture, haven't we? Okay, so that's your basic kind of approach. Now, if we go back a slide there, the university, the big boss at the top of the whole place, writes a contract which sets out what this guy's supposed to do. And this one writes contracts that set out what this guy's supposed to do. And we measure everybody's performance. And sometimes that kind of system is called the Cascade of Contracts. And so all these guys, there's not just him, there's a whole heap of them. They've all got their particular jobs to do. They all have their jobs defined. They all have their success measured. That contributes to his success. That contributes up there. That's called the Cascade of Contracts. Wonderful idea. Doesn't work. Doesn't work. It doesn't work because you can't define sufficiently and precisely enough everything that's important. Right? So if somebody tells me how to teach and they say you must do this and you must do that and you must do the other thing, it's going to be a disaster. A, because I won't like it, so I'm already against it, all right? And B, because they simply can't lay out all of that stuff. It's to do with how we interact as much as anything. So, manage the workers, but be nice to them, all right? Manage the workers, but be nice to them. That's the be nice to them bit. Is this bit coming in, isn't it? The humanistic management theory. Performance management cycles, we had the cycle before, precision and measurement, and the whole thing is supposed to advance productivity. So, the neoliberal theory. Now, the post-neoliberal theory. What's the alternative? What's the other way of doing things? What are people saying would be a better way to organise society? And remember, we're talking about the West here. China, I think you need to think of separately. You would call it post, the word post meaning after, beyond, after. Post-new liberalism. They love terms, don't they? Post, the new thing. The emphasis is on creativity. The emphasis is on getting all people to work together, right? Teamworks, working together to produce new ideas, to come up with new ways of doing things, to innovate. And we know that innovation is important, really important in China, but also elsewhere in the world. So neoliberalism is about forms of organisation for people that actually bring about creativity and new ideas. And one of the things that goes really well with this thing is the work of a German philosopher by the name of Immanuel Kant. And you'll be talking about Immanuel Kant in a few lectures on when we start talking a bit more about the theory and we're looking at the ethics, business ethics, which comes out shortly. When we start talking about business ethics, you're going to meet Immanuel Kant. And I'll show you a funny picture of him in a moment, I think. One of the many things he said was that you treat people as ends, not as means. In other words, he's saying, remember I said that the resources are the desk and all the other things that you use, including the people. Well, he's saying the exact opposite of that. You can't treat people that way. You must, and he gives a whole lot of reasons, which we will be considering. So there's a funny picture of Kant. That is the funniest picture of Immanuel Kant I have ever seen. Whether he looked anything like that is a bit hard to know, but that's how he was painted once. All right, an ethics about how we ought to treat people. And that takes us to this whole business of business ethics. Students seem to love that picture. Okay, which takes us to the question of New Zealand. And we're going to talk, and that could be a bit of China. I mean, that's the sort of picture you often associate with New Zealand because it's fairly wet. But I know there are places in China that look just like that. Okay, so New Zealand, it's the size of Japan, but it's only got 4 million people. All right, the main trading partner is Australia, but the second biggest trading partner is China. In actual fact, China. And that's relatively new. It used to be Britain, but now it's China. And the Chinese trade, both ways, is actually growing quite a lot. And as you know, it's milk products, milk powders included, sheep meats, pine logs, things like that. The people of the country, mainly Europeans, but 15% of them are Maori. And they're the indigenous or native peoples. All right? There are also Pacific Islanders, but the Pacific Islanders, you say Pacific Islanders as if they're all one group. It's a bit like saying Chinese, really. They're not all one group. The Pacific Islanders are 9 different nations. And you know how the Chinese are in different groups. Well, so are the Pacific Islanders. And then the Asians, mainly Chinese, 5% of the population, and most of the Asians, most of the Chinese that come to New Zealand come from Hong Kong, okay? And where my relations live in the middle of Auckland, the whole suburb, there's people from Hong Kong now, all right? If you go back when I was a boy, there was nobody from Hong Kong there. In fact, there was nobody from China there. But if you go now, the large numbers of people from Hong Kong, and quite often people from Hong Kong, and perhaps from elsewhere in China, will go to Auckland and they'll buy a house, right? And they'll live there for a little while. And then they'll go back to Hong Kong for their business, and their sons and daughters, and maybe their sons and daughters' friends will stay there and go to school, or no, not so much school, but university, go to university. So they'll be there living in the house and going to university. And when I go back to New Zealand, to and from New Zealand, I go with China Southern, right? China Southern, 4th biggest airline in the world now, China Southern. Not many people know that. And I go with China Southern, and there's about 250 people on the plane, right? And it's a direct flight from Guangdong to Auckland. And 250 people, of which 249 are Chinese, and then there's me. All right? Not always like that, not always like that, but some of them have been, some of my flights have been like that. So Yeah, and these are people who are Chinese people and involved in New Zealand. Migration to New Zealand, about 5,000 people, 5,000 people a year migrate to New Zealand permanently from the United Kingdom, another 5,000 from China, and another 5,000 from India. All right? Okay. Now, with this breakdown, there's a real interesting question about how the Maori people, the indigenous people, are actually going to get on. And that relates very much to human resource management. I mentioned a moment ago the global struggle against neoliberalism, and here's somebody protesting, part of the protest movements around the world, about the economic system and the way that it's not working and the way that it's hurting small people and the way that there are enormous numbers of people unemployed and the way that the world is struggling and that is having serious effects of all sorts. One of the parts of that has been the resurgence of the debate between capitalism and socialism. All right? Which theory is the best? What are the strengths of the theory of capitalism? What are its weaknesses? What about socialism? What are the strengths of socialism? What are its weaknesses? And what sort of arrangements do we kind of have that will make that work? And a part of this is the whole question of seeing labour as a market. People are now saying that labour is not a market. You just don't go along there and say, I'm here, I want work, we'll see what jobs are available and I will apply. Another approach is for the government to decide everybody has the right to work. Everybody has the right to work, and it's our responsibility to make sure that everybody in the country's got a job and an income and is productive. And of course the great pity of unemployment, it's not just the waste and the difficulty for the individual people who are unemployed, but it's this enormous waste for the country. The country's got all this enormous energy and it's not using it. And that's the real, in a public policy sense, that's the real important part of unemployment. So human resource management, strategic human resource management, is about these questions. And they go right to the base of questions in the subject of business ethics. I put at the end there, is having a job a right? Does everybody have a right to it? And if it is a right, then it means that the government should be providing it. Okay, so in New Zealand, because of the different cultures that we have, there's a real question. Is there a right way to do things, one right way? Do we all wish to live the same way? How should the rewards of society be distributed? Kind of three key questions for anybody interested in human resource management. Now, one of the things that's influenced New Zealand a lot in terms of management theory is sport. And I showed you these pictures before. These are young boys, really, not that young, but youngish. Can you see how there's a Maori guy there, and there's a couple of European guys who've got him? Playing sport together has been a very important part of bringing the cultures of New Zealand together. The other thing that was really important was the Second World War. Second World War, because they all went off to fight together. It didn't matter what their race was. They all fought and died together on the same basis, and that had the effect of bringing the country together a lot. But sport also has that same effect, and that, of course, is New Zealand's All Black not Maori All Blacks, they're All Black team. And you can see that different races are represented in that team. And you can also see, this is the English team, the British team, Great Britain, okay, here. And this is, they're doing a sort of a war dance thing called a haka, which they do at the start of the game. And you can see that there's different races there. And you can see how that sort of performance unifies people and says we're going to work as a team, we are common, we are a one, we are a unified body. And that's a very powerful idea. So the influence of sport has a lot to do with teamwork, authority, the question of who's in charge, who makes decisions, how decisions are made, and the question of leadership. So challenging ideas from sport, because New Zealanders, we might only be 4 million people in New Zealand, but we expect our sports teams to win, all right? We expect them to win. And they do, much more than you might think for 4 million people. and we're very upset because the Sevens rugby was just held in Hong Kong. Did you see it on the television last night and the night before? And Fiji won. Fiji won. But Fiji is big, strong people. Yeah, they're very good sports people. But they won. They won. How did they win? Fiji's a little wee tiny country. I'll tell you how they won. They won by teamwork. They won by teamwork and the way that they worked together. Okay, so the indigenous people of New Zealand, the Maori people, have long held difficulties about being a minority group, right? By being a minority group in what they regard as their own land, because they were there first. They were there first. And they wanted, still want and are, to develop their own approach to economic things, their own approach to business. And thus we've got this idea of a Maori business, a particular form of business, a business that starts with a different philosophy, with a different set of assumptions. And if you wanted to put it in a category, you'd say it's an example of this. It's the post-neoliberal type theory at work. It's one example of a post-neoliberal theory. And this guy that I showed you, the interesting part about him is, first of all, there's that you see, which is a statement of his identity, right? He says, these are my ancestors, these are my people, this is what I am, and I want to be true with that, and that's what I'm embracing. But notice the other side. Did you notice that? So he only has that half, and so he's sort of acknowledging that he's in the sort of two worlds, the two worlds. And I think that's a pretty good statement about the position of Maori, that they want to embrace the world and modernity, modern ways, the liberalism bit, but they also want their own bit. Now that is important in business. So Maori business emphasises culture, values and relationships and identity, and it's an example of the post-neoliberal. What are the values? Well, Maori values are distinctly different from those values. I was asked once to write a book for a Maori organisation, a big government Maori organisation. And the chief executive told me what he thought would be a good idea, and I went away and I wrote the book, and I came back to his office and we sat down, and it was quite late at night, it was about 7 or 8 o'clock at night. And we sat down and we had a drink, and I said, here's the book, etc., etc. And we talked about it, and that was good, and he thought it was fine. And he said, yeah, that was good. And I said, now, what we could do is that you could be one of the authors and I could be the other author, and we'd put that on the cover, and that would be all right. And he thought for a moment, and he said, I think, why do you say that I should be on the cover of this book? And I said, well, you're in charge of this major organisation, you're the chief executive. And he said, well, yes, but I can't do what I do unless other people are doing what they do. It's not just me, it depends on all of us. And there was a guy, an old guy, clearing up the rubbish, taking the rubbish tin. And he said to me, he said, well, maybe we should put his name on the book, because what he does is as important as what I do, because I couldn't do what I do if I'm sitting here covered in rubbish. I mean, he's got to take the rubbish away, hasn't he? So how do you choose to put me on the book and not the others? Now that's an indication of Maori values at work, all right? That's an indication of the cooperation thing, reciprocity. You help me, I help you. You help me, I help you. I try to operate that in my own business. There's a lot of silly things said about business, but and one of them is that about how you choose people to do jobs. I choose my friends. I choose people I can trust. I choose people I know and who have been proven a bit. That's what I choose. Now that's not neoliberal theory. Neoliberal theory says you must choose the person on the basis of an application. Everybody has got the right to apply, etc., etc. Right? All equal. That's the theory that's around here. That was the basis on which I got this job here. But in actual fact, if you're running something really serious, you get worried about that. You'd much rather know people who you know and who are proven. So that's the idea of reciprocity coming in there too. Okay, and the other thing is the relationship to the land and the concern about the environment is very typical in a Maori way of doing things. Maori value success, but everyone's contribution. And there's somebody who won a prize, she won a prize. And then learn from all cultures. Those students, they're older students, but they're students getting their degrees, they're actually business students. They happen to be Maori. They're business students, and they got together to have a photograph taken because they were all Maori. All right, but that indicates, they're grasping business theory, but it doesn't mean that they don't support the notion of Maori business and neoliberalism. All right, so that's your introduction to HRM. Let me just take you through now one topic, one specific topic, just as an example. And this relates to some research which I did in New Zealand. And you're doing a research project now, and I can tell you some of the things that I did in this research project and how you can learn things from them which might help you with the research that you're doing. Well, unlike you, well, not entirely, but partly unlike you, I got invited to do this research. You remember that a couple of years ago there was a big earthquake in Christchurch? A big earthquake, and people from China went to help out in the rescue effort, as did people from Japan and a number of other countries, and there was a big earthquake. And after that earthquake a little bit, one of the academic journals wanted to have some papers written about Christchurch, really I think as a sort of memorial to the people who died and the people who suffered. And I was asked to write one of those papers. So I guess it is a bit like you, because I was given a broad topic, the Christchurch earthquake, but I wasn't told what my precise topic was. I had to then start thinking, what could I do? Just as you're doing now. How do I find something that's researchable, something that I can actually manage and do, and say something that's going to be of interest to somebody? Because if you're going to write a paper, it's got to be of interest to somebody. So how do I do that? And that was what confronted me. Now, a lot of people, their homes were destroyed, their houses that were destroyed. To understand what my research is, you've got to understand a little bit about New Zealand. The earthquake was down here at Christchurch. That's where the earthquake was. All right, Christchurch. I live here, okay? So that's about the same distance as from here to Hong Kong, okay? About that distance. So it's not that close, but it's not that far either, So, but it's over the water, of course. So I'm here. So I'm going to write something about here. Yes, all right. It so happened that I was attending a meeting in town, and it was lunchtime, and I was going across to a cafe, and I was just sort of walking across the road, and I walked past the headquarters for emergency management in Wellington, and this was at the time of the earthquake. And there in the garden of the headquarters was a fellow I knew. His name was Mike, and he was in the garden of the headquarters there, and I was walking past, you see, and he was having a smoke. You're having a smoke. You're not allowed to smoke in the building, you've got to go outside. And I walked around and said, "Hi, Mike." He said, "Hello." And I said, "What are you doing there?" "Oh," he said, "I'm at the meeting. We're planning how Wellington is going to respond to Christchurch, what we're going to do to help Christchurch." He said, "I'm at the meeting." I said, "Oh, that's good. How's it going?" I won't tell you the word he used because it's a bit rude, but basically he said, "It's awful. It's no good. There's all sorts of problems." Now, when I came to be asked to write a paper on Christchurch, I remembered that conversation. And my paper turned out to be about the response of Wellington to Christchurch. Because I was in Wellington, All right, and also because of the talk with Mike, I knew that there was something interesting there. So those two things gave me the precise topic. That helped to narrow down what I was going to write about, just as you're trying to narrow your topics now, many of you. Okay? So, what happened in Christchurch? Well, can you see that railway track? It's kind of bent. And if you think about below the ground, you've got all the water pipes and all the sewage pipes taking the fresh water and the wastewater away. So if that's what happened on the ground, you can just imagine what the pipes are like under the ground. So the whole system didn't work, and the water supply stopped operating, and the sewage wasn't taken away. So all the waste products were building up, and there was a big health risk, a lot of difficulties. And there are some of the rescuers. Now, the people that take an interest in health risks and the disposal of sewage and the water supply, these guys and guy-esses are health inspectors, all right? And they work for city councils. They work in local government, just the same as they do here. They work in local government. So my research was about Wellington's helping Christchurch, and specifically, what did Wellington do to help Christchurch? It sent them these sorts of people. Well, I think he might be a firefighter, but those sorts of people. The people who are inspectors, the engineers that went down to look at the pipes and work out what had to be done to replace the pipes and how quickly it could be done. So my research was about these people and what happened when Wellington tried to send them to Christchurch. And if you think about it, that's human resource management. It's the sending of people from one place to another in an emergency situation. What did happen? Well, I wrote a paper, there it is, and it was for a conference, the Australia-New Zealand Academy of Management, ANZAM, A-Z-A-M, the Australia New Zealand Academy of Management. I wrote a paper for it in 2011. And that's got a funny title. It's called Proximal and Distance Emergency Management, the Wellington Response to the Christchurch Emergency. The Wellington Response to the Christchurch Emergency. What did we discover? Well, the people in Wellington, they were really very keen on doing the best that they possibly could for Christchurch. So they all got together very quickly and they formed up teams, groups of people, and these were qualified people. They were engineers and health inspectors and all those skills, and they said, right, go to Christchurch. And they got them to Christchurch, and it was a bit of a disaster in another way. Why was it a disaster? First of all, they got to Christchurch, and they were supposed to report to the headquarters, where the Civil Defence headquarters was for the engineers. They found their cell phones didn't work. They couldn't communicate with anybody because all the cell phone towers had been knocked down. So they were there and they couldn't talk to anybody. They couldn't get out. Then they found that they couldn't get from one place to t'other because all the roads were broken. Then they discovered that they actually had to stay where they were and they didn't have enough food and water. Now these problems, these are a human resource management problem. And it so happened that we discovered that whilst the people in Wellington knew a great deal about managing emergencies in Wellington, they'd never done any research or done any planning on emergencies in Christchurch. They never dreamt that they would have to do that. So they had never thought it through. And in their haste to do something, a heap of mistakes were made. And that's what my paper's about, those mistakes. It's in human resource management. Now, after the conference paper, I was asked to, one of the journals, a human resource management journal, asked me to write a little thing for them. And the result was that I did this one. Oh, that's the abstract for the last one. And we did that article, and that's a lady that did some work with me on this. We worked together. Beverly McNally's her name. And this was the first article that we did, responding to Christchurch. human resource and occupational safety and health. All right, human resource and occupational safety and health professional people. And then we did another one, keeping people safe during an emergency deployment. All right, just about how you send people into an emergency zone to do work, but look after them. And you can see that that's a human resource management thing too. Okay, so thank you very much. That's the end of your lecture, and we'll have your tutorial later. Bye-bye. See you soon.